I appreciate my colleague from Iowa, Senator Ernst, for organizing this opportunity for several of us in the Senate to discuss the Green New Deal and to do it this week. To put it mildly, the Green New Deal is ambitious. To frame it more accurately, it's an unworkable pie-in-the-sky attempt to reshape every aspect of everyday Americans' lives. First, let me say that I'm proud of my record in successfully advancing the availability and affordability of renewable energy. Many have called me the father of the Wind Energy Incentive Act of 1992. I suppose after, probably 26 years, that makes me the grandfather of the Wind Energy Tax Incentive Act. My legislation sought to give this alternative energy source the ability to compete against traditional finite energy sources. At that time, we never knew about fracking for natural gas and for oil. And we thought we were going to be completely dependent upon Saudi Arabia for energy. Now we know that's not true. But back in 1992 and before, we did everything we could to think up every alternative energy we could to be less dependent upon the Saudis. So one of those acts that I was involved in was wind energy. And the wind energy bill, now law, has been extremely successful. Now Iowa supplies more than 35% of its own electricity from wind. We were the first state in the country to generate more than 1/3 of its electricity from wind. Wind energy employs approximately 7,000 Iowans and nearly 3,000 wind turbines in Iowa to generate millions of dollars in economic activity. So I want to make it very clear that I'm speaking as someone with a very successful track record of advancing clean energy. But to think about what the Green New Deal's about, presumably they don't know we've been this successful. Because the new Green Deal, on the other hand, is nothing more than a grab bag of vague aspirations. In fact, the Green New Deal was initially introduced in the House and Senate by its authors as a non-binding, symbolic resolution. In other words, a lot of hot air. That means that even if it passed as introduced, it would not make law. So I'm glad that Senate Majority Leader McConnell reintroduced the text in a format that could become law, so we senators can go on record as whether we want to make this the policy of the United States. It would be one thing if the policy and goals remained on topic, namely reducing pollution and cutting our nation's carbon emissions. Those are worthy goals. But the resolution reads like a utopian manifesto, seeking to implement every liberal policy priority from the past many decades. We've seen how the extreme left-wing agendas that rely on the power of the state and usurp the role of individuals, how those policies turn out. We have plenty of examples. Look at the former Soviet Union. Look at Cuba over the last 60 years. Look at what's happened to Venezuela in the last 15 years, going from the richest country in South America to a destitute country where they die of malnutrition. and people can't get medicine. So in more instances than the three I just gave you, these utopian ideas never turn out very well. Now, for sure, the Green New Deal includes goals related to energy and the environment, but for the most part, they're wholly unrealistic. For example, and I'm quoting now and then from their agenda, calling for upgrading all existing buildings, or in another statement, meeting 100% of the power demands of the United States through clean, renewable, zero-emission energy sources, all within the next 10 years, is simply not feasible. And of course, no concrete proposals are put forward on how this is to be achieved. Green New Deal just leaves us scratching our heads, thinking about all this, how all this would work. A lot of questions. Would it require the government to mandate that every building owner in the United States make costly building improvements to meet national standards set here in Washington, D.C.? Another question, would every homeowner have to submit to government inspection to ensure that his or her home meets the standards dictated by the government? Another question, what government expenditures would have to be made, assuming all of this is even technologically possible, to go from about 17% of U.S. electricity generation coming from new renewables today to a total 100% in 10 years? Or the last question I'll raise, are the backers of Green New Deal willing to support nuclear energy as a means to reach their goal? On this last point, I would conclude that a summary of the Green New Deal initially put out by the chief author in the House suggests a lack of support for nuclear energy. As I've said before in my remarks today, I've been a leader on renewable energy production for decades, not just wind, as I've said, but geothermal, solar, biofuels, etc. So I'm not just talking about being the author of the wind energy production tax credit. During my leadership of the Senate Finance Committee in the 2000s, when I was chairman there, I oversaw the establishment, the enhancement, and renewal of numerous tax incentives that promote everything from wind and solar to renewable fuels like biodiesel to energy-efficient homes, buildings, and appliances. Unlike the unrealistic goals of the Green New Deal, these initiatives I just read are not only law, but they're real, proven, bipartisan actions that I shepherded into law to make the United States more energy independent and also at the same time improving our environment. Unfortunately, many of these key energy incentives I just mentioned are currently expired, and some of them have been expired for more than a year. Now, we had a real opportunity to extend these energy incentives as part of the appropriation deal reached earlier this month, but that was ultimately blocked by House Democrats, probably some of the same people that are promoting the Green New Deal. They seem overly focused on the lofty goals of the Green New Deal, or as Speaker Pelosi called the Green New Deal, quote, the green dream, or whatever they call it, no one knows what it is, end of quote. The House Democrats could not be bothered a month ago with extensions of existing and successful provisions that incentivized the type of investment that they claim to have backed. And not only tend to incentivize, actually have incentivized alternative energy over the last 2.5 decades. Provisions that support millions of jobs for people who are actually willing to work. Perhaps this just shows that the Green New Deal is less about tackling energy and environmental issues and more about remaking America into a dreamy, new, progressive paradise. No sector of the economy is left unchecked by the Green New Deal. Make no mistake about thinking otherwise. The author of the Green New Deal, these authors are intent on reshaping every aspect of American life through a national, social, industrial, and economic mobilization. And those last 6 words are in quotations. Shaping American life through national, social, industrial, and economic mobilization that is eerily reminiscent of 5-year plans of the former Soviet Union or of the great leap forward under Chairman Mao of China. Even the family farmer is not spared from its grand plans. The Green New Dealers want to remove what they call pollution and greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture through sustainable farming and building a more sustainable food system that ensures universal access to healthy food. Now, I'm not against farmers taking actions to prevent soil erosion and minimizing pollution, because we farmers do that already. Been doing it for decades. The recently passed Farm Bill invests more in conservation programs than any farm bill before. I trust that farmers know more and have more common sense about how to take care of their land than some bureaucrat here in Washington, D.C., or politicians from New York City. We all know that Washington, D.C. is an island surrounded by reality. So you put forth legislation like this, and it's just like 535 members of Congress have all the knowledge in the world to tell 310 million other people what they ought to be doing. And I don't believe that all that smarts rest here in the Congress of the United States or even the bureaucracy of this government. Over the last several years, when it comes to farming, we've seen farmers readily adopt the use of cover crops to prevent nutrient runoff and to sequester carbon in the soil through what we call minimum or no tillage. Today, farmers may go down as the first group in the history to leave the land better than they found it for future generations. Moreover, every indication is that these calls for sustainable farming and a sustainable food system go well beyond farmers being good stewards of our natural resources. It appears to be intent on changing everything from how we farm to what we farm. A fact sheet released by the House author shortly after introduction made this perfectly clear. It notes a desire, now listen to this, it notes a desire to rid the planet of methane gas-emitting cows. In case the authors are unaware, all cows and all people emit methane. It's part of the natural digestive process. The only way to stop these emissions is to ban animal agriculture. That proposal couldn't be more disconnected or out of touch with Americans. And that's what makes the taxpayers feel that there's nobody in Washington, D.C. that's got any common sense. But don't worry. According to the authors of the Green New Deal in the House, quote, it's not to say you get rid of agriculture or force everybody to go vegan, end of quote. This doesn't instill much confidence in the farmer about the real intentions behind the Green New Deal. I'm amazed by the scope of what the authors would have the government impose on the American people. I will end by noting that I'm interested in working with my colleagues on sensible policies to secure our energy independence and improve our environment. But I fear this will not be possible so long as my Democratic colleagues remain intent on handing over the country to the government to remake Washington, D.C., to make it in Washington, D.C.'s image. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.